Hello and welcome back to Voyage of a Time Wanderer. Today I am here to share my top 10 fiction reads of 2021. So I read roughly 75 fiction books in 2021 and I have chosen my top 10 to share with you all today. Even though it was very hard to do, this is ranked, so I'm going to start with my 10th favorite and move all the way up to the book that won my heart this year. As you'll see, these are not necessarily books that are published in 2021. In fact, I'm not sure if any of them were actually published in 2021, but they're just books that I myself read in 2021 and really enjoyed. So without further ado, let me get started with my top 10 fiction reads of 2021. Starting with my 10th favorite book of the last year, and that is The Other Bennett Sister by Janice Hadlow. This is a Pride and Prejudice retelling told from the point of view of Mary Bennett. And it was actually such an enjoyable Austen retelling to read. I think that is a subgenre of historical fiction that is very difficult to do well because there are so many readers like myself who are very invested in Austen's characters and have strong opinions about how they would or wouldn't act. So I think walking that fine line between writing your own retelling and your own book with bringing characters to life in a new way while also remaining true to Austen can be very difficult, but The Other Bennett Sister did an absolutely wonderful job with that. The Other Bennett Sister is not just a retelling of the events of Pride and Prejudice. The very first part of the book is actually set just before Pride and Prejudice, and then kind of the middle section is an actual retelling of the different events of Pride and Prejudice. And then the last half of the book really takes Mary and carries her past the end of Pride and Prejudice and imagines how her life could have played out, what might have happened to her, and how kind of the threads of her character that we saw in Pride and Prejudice could have been fleshed out. I think this book did an excellent job of staying true to the spirit of Pride and Prejudice, while at the same time it's definitely made me think of some of the events in the original book, such as the Netherfield Ball, as well as some of the original characters, not just Mary Bennett, but also people like Mr. Bennett, Mr. Collins, and Charlotte Lucas in a whole new way, and really fleshed out aspects of their character that has made me think of them in a new light when I am rereading Pride and Prejudice or watching adaptations in the future. Then my 9th favorite read of 2021 is Gunnar's Daughter by Sigrid Undset. This is a fairly sad and short work by her, especially compared to the length and depth of the Kristen Lavransdatter trilogy, and this book is set in the same geographic area but a couple hundred years before Kristen, right around the time when the saga era was coming to a close and paganism was ceding way to Christianity. The main character of this book, Vigdis, Gunnar's daughter, is a victim of sexual assault right at the beginning of the book, and kind of this story chronicles her moving forward from that and trying to raise the resulting child as a single woman in a patriarchal society that was obsessed with family honor. It's fascinating to read this book that Sigrid Undset wrote a full decade before she wrote the Christian trilogy, but which deals with so many of the same themes, including love, revenge, generational impacts of trauma, and really just the plight of human existence. While the Christian trilogy remains my favorite of Sigrid Undset's work, I'm still so glad that I read this book in 2021 and it still made its way onto my favorites list, so I still think it's really well worth a read, particularly if you're interested in kind of earlier Nordic history. Then my 8th favorite read of 2021 was Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie. I read this as a buddy read right at the very peak of our hottest summer heat wave, so the atmospheric vibes were immaculate for me. This is one of the books in Christie's Hercule Poirot series, and I read it because there is a movie adaptation coming out which is being delayed a couple times, but it is coming out soon, and it's set as a sequel to Murder on the Orient Express, which I really loved the Kenneth Branagh adaptation, so this is going to be a continuation of that series except adapting Death on the Nile. The basic premise for this story is that Hercule Poirot decides to take a Nile river cruise in Egypt, and he ends up on this cruise boat going down the Nile with a rather interesting mix of fellow passengers. This mystery actually had a bit of a protracted start, and the murder didn't take place until, I would say, almost halfway through the novel. So not only are we wondering who the killer is, but there's also a while there where we're actually wondering who the victim is going to be as well. So that aspect definitely ramped up the tension building. This was just a thoroughly enjoyable Golden Age mystery, and I'm definitely looking forward to continuing on reading more Christie in the future. Then my 7th favorite read of 2021 is a bit of a cheat because I'm putting a whole series here as a placeholder for book number 7, and that is the Mitford series by Karon. I've enjoyed reading so many of the books in this series, and there have been a couple that have been 5-star reads for me, so I couldn't really choose which one single book to choose as a favorite. And honestly, reading this series, it does feel like a single continuous story rather than individual novels, so it's really hard to pick which one would be a favorite. Together with Kate Howe, Rainey from Rainy Day Reads, and Angie from Literary Labours, I've been co-hosting a read-along this whole year through the Mitford series, and we've been having monthly live stream discussions over on Kate's channel, and it has been just such an enjoyable reading experience, and coming back to these books month after month has been such a cozy respite during this wild year. The book series centers around Father Tim, who is an Anglican pastor in a small North Carolina town, and as the series progresses, we get more and more invested in his interpersonal relationships, his wife Cynthia, the boy he takes in Dooley, his dog Barnabas, as well as all the various small town drama and ups and downs in the lives of the people that call Mitford home. I'm definitely looking forward to finishing off the last 4 books in the series in the first half of 2022, and because this was just such an enjoyable reading experience, I had to put this series on my favorites list. Then coming in as book number 6, I have Last Christmas in Paris by Hazel Gaynor and Heather Webb. I just did a whole video gushing about this book and comparing it with the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, so I'll keep my thoughts fairly brief, and I'll try to link up in the cards that video in case you're interested in seeing kind of a more in-depth review of this book and my thoughts on it. But suffice to say, I really, really loved it, and it deserved number 6 on my favorite fiction reads. This is an epistolary novel set in World War I, and we're really following the letters exchanged between our main character Evie and her brother's best friend Thomas over the course of the entire First World War. What I really appreciated about this book, and what I think cemented it on my favorites list for the year, is how it grappled with the resilience of humanity and the importance of connection during some of the darkest times in global history. Then my 5th favorite fiction read for 2021 is Severance by Ling Ma. This book is Station 11's cynical, anti-capitalist little sister, so considering how much I loved Station 11 and it ended up on my favorites for 2020, it's no surprise that Severance ended up on my favorites list for 2021. Whereas Station 11 left me nostalgic for the presents and really marveling in the everyday, this book had an overriding bleakness to it that I think highlighted some of the flaws in our current society. Like Station 11, this book is a pandemic novel set during an alternate reality present day, and honestly it's a bit eerie that this was written pre-COVID yet managed to get so many aspects of our pandemic response correct. All the work emails about uncertain times, the corporate branded masks, uncertainty about whether you're overreacting or underreacting in your response while conspiracy theories abound around you, the fascination of photojournalism to the most affected spots, travel bans, and CDC posters everywhere, all of that features in Severance. Well, on the surface, this is an apocalyptic pandemic zombie novel. It's also so much more than that. It's a clever critique of late-stage capitalism, millennial office culture, and really gets to the heart of the struggles of first-generation immigrants. This book is one that I've thought about long after I finished reading it, and I got fairly emotionally invested in our main character and her story, and the ending left me with some questions that I would love to see resolved in a sequel. Then, speaking of Station 11, my 4th favorite fiction read in 2021 was The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. This is the long-awaited quasi-sequel to Station 11, and I knew as soon as I started reading it that it would end up on my favorites for the year. It's another hauntingly beautiful novel by Emily St. John Mandel. I'm obsessed with the way that she writes her books from a shifting kaleidoscope of perspectives and time periods, starting with a discordant jumble of story pieces that slowly start to slot and slide together until by the end you have the full picture visible of the incredible story that she was weaving throughout the entire book. I went into this thinking it was a prequel to Station 11 and found out that it is not quite that, but also so much more. It's set in a parallel universe from Station 11, or rather, it's set in our universe and Station 11 is the parallel universe to our universe. I found it fascinating how often in this book characters would reference alternate realities or counter lives that could have happened to them if things had gone a little bit differently when, because we have read Station 11, we know that an alternate reality from this book is even bleaker than their present reality. If you had told me a few years ago that a book about multinational shipping companies, Ponzi schemes, and the 2009 financial collapse would end up on my favorites list, I probably wouldn't have believed you, yet here it is, sitting at position number 4. I absolutely love this book. And now we're moving into the top 3, my very best reads of 2021, and coming in at number 3 is The Mercies by Kiran, Millwood, Hargrave. This is a book that I read all the way back in January, so it definitely had staying power to stick so close to the top of this list. I read this book at the recommendation of my sister, and it was on my Reading Through My Family Tree Norway list that I started off the year with. It's actually loosely based on true events, which made it extra interesting for me. It's set during the 1700s in a remote fishing village in Norway. All of the men from this village are out at sea, doing their fishing when a freak storm blows up and kills all of them. So this book is really telling the story of the women who are left in this village, their resilience to forge a new life and a new way of living without having any men, and then the devastating impacts when a foreigner arrives intent on doing a witch hunt. The location of the village in this book is actually quite close to another remote small fishing village where my 2 times great-grandmother was born and raised, so I found the insights into what daily life was like for women in this town to be so interesting, as well as the tense relationship between Norwegians and the Sami people. Also, if you're a Taylor Swift fan, the song Ivy from Evermore is pretty much this book in a song form. I can't listen to that song without scenes from this book flashing to my mind instantly. Then my second favorite fiction read of 2021 was The Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim. I read this book during the month of April and I highly recommend it as a spring read. It is just so beautiful, a mixture of whimsy and humor with gorgeous, evocative nature writing and heartwarming personal exploration and growth. Despite being a fairly short novel, this book really tackles with some big subjects, including what it was like for women living in the interwar era. I particularly loved the portrayal of different marriages in this book, and that is one of the main aspects of the plot that I find myself continuing to think about and mull over even all these months after having finished reading it. I'm not a big rereader, so it's definitely a high compliment when I say that this is a book that I could see myself rereading again in the future, and I think it's one of those books that I could read again and again and get something different out of every single time and at every different stage of life I read it at. And so we've made it to the top of the list, and it's time to reveal my very favorite read of 2021. I don't think this is going to be a huge surprise to share that my favorite fiction read of 2021 is Lady Audley's Secret by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. I don't think this is a huge surprise considering how much I've talked about this book on this channel since I finished reading it in September. This is a Victorian classic, a sensation novel that is focusing around Robert Audley, who is a young man who is kind of trying to solve 2 different mysteries at once. The secret past of his uncle's young wife, Lady Audley, as well as the disappearance of his best friend when the 2 of them were visiting his uncle's estate. He has a gut feeling that his friend's disappearance is tied up with whatever Lady Audley's secret is, and while he desperately tries to put the pieces of the puzzle together, it seems as though there are forces fighting against him. This book just gripped me instantly. I couldn't stop listening to my audiobook, but despite having a very intense, fast-paced, suspense-driven plot, it also had some absolutely beautiful passages of writing. There were a number of descriptive passages describing the grounds and gardens of the estate house that were just so beautiful. I actually had to stop listening to pull up the text of the book on Gutenberg to pull out those quotes and put them on my list of favorite book quotes because it was just so beautifully written and kind of a nice surprise to have a book that's both a fast-paced mystery and also a beautifully written classic piece of literature. I read this book as part of Kate Howe's Patreon book club, so even after listening to some other people's critique of this book, in our book club discussion, which there are elements of this book that I recognize are not entirely perfect, but I love it so much that I didn't mind, and the reading experience was so good that it still earned the top place on my list of fiction reads. It's one of those books that I just want to recommend to everyone and anyone who shows a remote interest in Victorian literature and it has ignited my interest in both the sensation novel subgenre, which I had previously avoided, as well as Mary Elizabeth Braddon, who is an author that I'm looking forward to discovering more and more of in the future. So those are my 10 favorites and the 4 physical copies that I have of my favorite fiction reads of 2021. I had such a wonderful reading year in 2021 and read so many memorable books that I know will stick with me for years to come. I hope you had some absolutely fantastic reads as well, and until next time, enjoy wandering through the pages of a good book.